Nobody at the Cedar County Livestock Market noticed the old man in the faded blue cap. That was exactly how he liked it. Walter Hayes, 72 years old, moved through the crowded auction yard with the same slow, unhurried steps he'd used for the last 15 years. He sold 3 crates of tomatoes, 2 sacks of feed corn, and a pair of goats before noon. He shook hands with old friends, nodded at strangers, and counted his cash twice before folding it into his shirt pocket. To anyone watching, he was just another farmer trying to make it through another season. Nobody would have guessed that this same man once walked into rooms where kings and dictators feared to speak too loudly. By 2 in the afternoon, Walter loaded the last of his unsold vegetables into the bed of his rusted-out Ford pickup and pulled onto the county highway, heading home. The sun was warm. The radio played an old country song, and for a moment, Walter allowed himself to feel something close to peace. That peace didn't last long. The first roar of engines came from behind him, loud, aggressive, deliberate. Walter checked his mirror and saw them. 7 motorcycles, black leather, chrome gleaming under the sun. The Iron Vultures Motorcycle Club. Everyone in the county knew their name, and everyone knew to stay out of their way. They didn't just pass him. They surrounded him. One bike cut sharply in front of his truck, forcing Walter to slam the brakes. Another pulled up beside his window, revving the engine like a threat. Walter's hand stayed steady on the wheel. His face showed nothing. Not fear, not anger, nothing at all. That stillness, if anyone had been trained to notice it, was the first sign that this old farmer was not like other old farmers. "Hey, Grandpa!" one of the bikers shouted, laughing. "Nice truck. Does it still run, or are we looking at it?" The others laughed with him. One rider swerved close enough to clip Walter's side mirror, snapping it clean off. Another forced him toward the shoulder of the road until the truck's tires left the pavement and sank into soft mud. Walter stopped the truck. He didn't argue. He didn't reach for a weapon, though there was one hidden beneath his seat that none of them would ever find in time. He simply sat there, watching, calculating, an old habit that had never truly left him. That calm only made them angrier. Rex Dalton, the group's loudest member, jumped off his bike and yanked open Walter's door. "Get out, old man. Let's see how tough you are without your truck." Walter stepped out slowly, his boots sinking into the mud. He said nothing. Rex shoved him hard, and Walter let himself fall backward into the ditch beside the road, landing in cold, dirty water. The bikers erupted into laughter. Someone pulled out a phone and began recording, narrating the moment like a comedian at a bad show. "Look at this legend, folks. Old Walter here thought he could just drive on by like nothing. Say hi to the internet, Grandpa." They smashed his crates of vegetables, kicking tomatoes and corn into the mud. Cars passed by on the highway. Several slowed down, phones raised, capturing the scene instead of stopping to help. A few people even laughed through their open windows before driving on. Nobody stepped in. Nobody asked if the old man was okay. Walter said nothing through all of it. He simply watched Rex's face, memorizing every detail. The small scar above his eyebrow, the tattoo of a vulture on his neck, the nervous way his eyes darted toward his friends for approval. Old instincts, buried but never gone, were already working behind Walter's calm expression. Just as the bikers prepared to leave, Rex noticed something small and metallic lying near Walter's overturned crate, an old, dented brass lighter that had fallen from Walter's jacket pocket during the struggle. Rex snatched it up, turning it over in his fingers. "What's this, old-timer? Some kind of lucky charm?" Rex grinned, holding it up for the camera. "I think I'll keep this. Souvenir from today's show." Walter's eyes flickered, just for a second, toward the lighter. It was the only moment of real emotion he allowed himself to show. Then it was gone, hidden again behind the mask he had worn for the last 20 years. The bikers roared with laughter, mounted their motorcycles, and sped off down the highway, leaving Walter sitting in the mud beside his broken crates and ruined vegetables. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He simply sat there for a long moment, staring at the empty road where the bikers had disappeared. Then, slowly, methodically, he began gathering what remained of his belongings, loading them back into his damaged truck as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But something unusual had happened. Something far more dangerous than any of those bikers could have imagined. That lighter, the worthless souvenir Rex now carried in his jacket pocket, contained a secret buried inside its base. A secret Walter had protected for 2 decades. A secret that powerful, dangerous men across the world believed had died with him. They were wrong. And by stealing it, Rex Dalton had just placed himself, his entire motorcycle club, and every person connected to them directly in the path of a storm none of them were prepared to survive. Walter climbed into his truck, started the engine, and drove home in silence. His hands were steady on the wheel. But behind his calm blue eyes, a machine that had been dormant for 20 years was slowly beginning to wake up. The farmhouse was quiet when Walter finally pulled into the driveway, mud still clinging to his boots and shirt. He sat in the truck for a long moment before going inside, staring at his weathered hands on the steering wheel. They weren't shaking. They hadn't shaken in decades. But something inside his chest felt tight, like a door creaking open after years of being sealed shut. He walked into the house, past the old photographs on the wall, his late wife Margaret smiling beside him at their wedding, his daughter as a little girl feeding chickens in the yard. Normal photographs. A normal life. That had been the whole point. Walter went straight to the bedroom, knelt beside the bed, and pulled back a corner of the rug. Beneath it was a floorboard slightly different from the others. A hairline seemed invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. He pressed down on one end, and it lifted with a soft click. Inside was a metal box he hadn't opened in 20 years. His hands moved slowly as he lifted the lid. An old encrypted radio, its casing scratched but intact. 2 burner phones, still sealed in plastic. A stack of passports under different names. Walter Hayes was not the only identity he had ever carried. Bundles of emergency cash, faded and rubber-banded. And beneath all of it, a folded photograph of a much younger version of himself, standing beside 3 other operatives in a location that no longer existed on any official map. He had sworn he would never need any of this again. He was wrong. The lighter Rex had stolen wasn't just some sentimental keepsake. Hidden inside its base, sealed behind a false brass bottom, was a strip of microfilm. The last piece of unfinished business from Walter's final mission before he vanished from the world 20 years ago. Financial records, real names, proof connecting a network of powerful men to crimes across 3 continents. Evidence that could still destroy people who had spent 2 decades believing they were safe. Walter closed his eyes and let out a slow breath. They'll find out. It's only a matter of time. He was right to worry, because 300 miles away, in a dimly lit office above a shipping company that existed only on paper, a different kind of meeting was happening. Rex Dalton sat in the clubhouse that night, still buzzing from the excitement of the day. His video, Old Farmer Gets Put in His Place, had already been uploaded, already spreading across social media, already collecting thousands of laughing comments. Rex passed the brass lighter between his fingers, admiring how the video made him look tough, dangerous, untouchable. He had no idea what he was actually holding. Across the country, in that same dim office, a man named Anton Voss sat behind a desk, scrolling through his phone with the bored expression of someone who had seen too much of the world to be impressed by any of it. He stopped scrolling when a video auto-played, bikers laughing, an old farmer sitting in mud, a lighter held up to the camera. Anton's expression changed instantly. He leaned forward, pausing the video, zooming in on the farmer's face. Weathered, tired-looking, ordinary in every way, except for the eyes. Anton had seen those eyes before, 20 years ago, across a negotiating table in Prague, right before that same man walked away with evidence that had cost Anton's organization 3 of its top leaders and nearly a decade of rebuilding. "That's not possible," Anton whispered. He called his second-in-command into the room and replayed the video twice, then 3 times, freezing on the lighter as Rex held it toward the camera. Anton recognized the dents, the exact placement of the scratch near the hinge. He had personally handed that lighter to an operative once known only by his code name, a man the organization believed had died in a house fire 20 years earlier, along with all the evidence he had stolen. "He's alive," Anton said quietly, almost in disbelief. "The ghost is alive." And some idiot bikers just posted the location where they found him. Within an hour, phones were ringing across 4 different countries. Old alliances that had gone silent for 2 decades were suddenly active again. Men who had built new lives, new identities, new fortunes on the assumption that their darkest secrets had burned along with a nameless farmhouse years ago were now being told the truth. The evidence still existed. The man who took it was still alive, and it was now in the hands of a group of reckless bikers who had no idea what kind of danger they had just filmed themselves stealing. Anton stood, straightened his jacket, and gave the order that would set an entire manhunt into motion. Find the lighter, find the bikers, and find out exactly who this old man really is before he finds us first. Back at the farmhouse, Walter sat at his kitchen table long into the night. The metal box open before him, an old photograph of his younger self staring back like a stranger. He knew, better than anyone, exactly what was coming. The ghosts of his past had just been given a reason to hunt again. And this time, they wouldn't stop until either the lighter was recovered or every person who had touched it was silenced for good. The Ire Vultures clubhouse buzzed with celebration that night. Rex's video had crossed 100,000 views by sundown, and every biker in the room wanted to relive the moment again and again. Beer bottles clinked. Someone had already printed out a mocking meme of Walter sitting in the mud, taping it to the wall like a trophy. "To the legend who put Grandpa Farmer in his place," one biker shouted, raising his bottle toward Rex. Rex grinned, spinning the brass lighter between his fingers as the group cheered around him. He had no idea that the small object in his hand was worth more than every motorcycle, every building, and every dollar the club had ever owned combined. Outside, the night was calm. Crickets hummed in the tall grass surrounding the old warehouse the club used as their headquarters. Nobody noticed the 3 black SUVs that rolled quietly to a stop a quarter-mile down the road, headlights off, engine silent. Inside those vehicles were men who didn't laugh at anything. At exactly 11:47, the clubhouse door exploded inward. 6 armed men in tactical gear moved through the building with terrifying precision, weapons raised, voices sharp and commanding. "Nobody moves. Where's the lighter?" Chaos erupted instantly. Bikers scrambled for weapons they never had time to reach. Tables flipped, bottles shattered. One biker who tried to charge the intruders was struck down hard, crumpling to the floor with a broken arm. Another took a blow to the head and collapsed, unconscious before he even understood what was happening. Rex didn't hesitate. The moment the door blew open, instinct took over. He shoved through the panicked crowd, slipped through a side exit he'd used a dozen times to sneak out during police raids, and disappeared into the darkness behind the building, the lighter still gripped tightly in his fist. The mercenaries tore through the clubhouse with brutal efficiency, flipping furniture, smashing lockers, dragging bikers up by their collars, and demanding answers nobody could give. They didn't want money. They didn't want drugs or weapons. They wanted one specific object, and they made it violently clear that anyone who didn't cooperate would regret it. The lighter, brass old, dented, "Where is it?" "We don't know what you're talking about, man. I swear." A gunshot into the ceiling silenced the room. Someone screamed. Within minutes, the mercenaries realized the object they were searching for wasn't in the building, and with cold efficiency, they withdrew as quickly as they had arrived, vanishing into the night before local police could even respond to the noise complaints. By the time sirens echoed in the distance, the SUVs were long gone. Walter arrived nearly an hour later. He hadn't slept that night. Something old and familiar had stirred awake in him the moment he'd opened the hidden floorboard, and by midnight, dressed in dark clothes with a small flashlight tucked into his jacket, he was already driving toward the last place he knew Rex frequented, the address tag in the corner of that humiliating video. He found the clubhouse in ruins. Police tape wasn't up yet. Ambulances hadn't arrived. Just broken furniture, shattered glass, and dazed bikers sitting on the curb outside, nursing injuries and staring blankly at the wreckage of their own headquarters. Walter moved through the scene like a man reading a familiar language. He crouched near a bullet hole in the wall, studying its angle. He examined tire marks in the gravel outside, noting their width and spacing. He picked up a shell casing, turned it over once in his fingers, and immediately recognized the manufacturer, not something available to ordinary criminals. Professional equipment, professional training, professional execution. This wasn't a robbery, Walter thought grimly. This was a message. He approached one of the injured bikers sitting against the wall, a young man holding a bloody cloth to his forehead. "Who did this?" Walter asked quietly. The biker squinted up at him, confused. "You're that old farmer from the video, ain't you?" Walter didn't answer directly. "Where's Rex?" "Gone. Ran the second the door blew in." "Smart move. Honestly, those guys weren't playing around." The biker winced, pressing the cloth tighter against his wound. "They kept the skin about some lighter." "Rex's lighter. The one he stole from you." Walter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Did they get it?" "No. Rex still has it. Wherever the hell he ran off to." Walter straightened, his eyes scanning the wreckage one final time, calculating, already 3 steps ahead of everyone else standing in that parking lot. These weren't local criminals looking for money. This was Voss's network, methodical, disciplined, unwilling to leave witnesses if pushed too far. And if they were willing to raid an entire motorcycle clubhouse over one lighter, they wouldn't stop until they found Rex. Which meant Walter needed to find him first. Not to punish him, not for revenge, to protect him, whether Rex deserved it or not. And to reclaim the one piece of evidence that could either end this nightmare for good or unleash it on an entire county of innocent people who had no idea what kind of storm was coming for them. Walter turned, walked back to his truck without another word, and disappeared into the night, already tracing the first thread of a hunt only he understood how to run. Rex ran for nearly 6 hours straight, cutting through cornfields, hopping fences, and hitchhiking rides from strangers who never asked questions. By sunrise, he was 70 miles from the clubhouse, exhausted, terrified, and completely alone for the first time in years. The lighter sat heavy in his jacket pocket, though he still had no idea why it mattered so much to anyone. He stumbled into a small roadside diner just outside Millbrook, a town so small it barely had a stoplight. He needed food, coffee, and time to think. He slid into a booth near the back, keeping his eyes on the door, jumping at every bell that rang above it. He didn't know that Walter was already 3 towns behind him, following a trail of small clues most people would have missed entirely. A gas station clerk who remembered a nervous young man with tattoos buying a burner phone, a trucker who mentioned giving a hitchhiker a lift toward Millbrook, a farmer who'd seen someone matching Rex's description sleeping in his barn overnight. Walter moved quietly, methodically, never drawing attention, blending into every small town exactly the way he'd been trained decades ago. Nobody suspected the calm, old farmer asking simple questions was hunting a man with the same precision he once used tracking arms dealers across 3 continents. At the diner, trouble found Rex before Walter did. A young waitress named Casey was closing out the register when a man in a stained hoodie walked in, glancing nervously around the empty diner before pulling a knife from his sleeve. "Empty the drawer. Now." Casey froze, her hands trembling as she reached for the cash. Rex, sitting just a few booths away, considered slipping quietly out the back. He had enough problems of his own. But something made him hesitate, some small, buried piece of decency he didn't know he still had. Before Rex could decide what to do, the diner door creaked open and Walter stepped inside. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply walked toward the counter as if he hadn't noticed anything unusual at all, ordering coffee in a calm, tired voice. The robber, distracted by the unexpected customer, turned his head for half a second. That was all Walter needed. In one fluid motion too fast for anyone in the diner to fully process, Walter disarmed the man, twisted his wrist until the knife clattered to the floor, and pressed him firmly against the counter with an unnerving, practiced calm. The entire exchange lasted less than 4 seconds. You should apologize to the young lady, Walter said quietly, and then you should leave. The robber, pale and shaking, mumbled an apology and fled out the door without looking back. Casey stood frozen behind the counter, staring at Walter with wide eyes. Who are you? Just an old man who doesn't like bullies, Walter said simply, sliding a few dollars onto the counter for his untouched coffee. He turned and walked out before anyone could ask another question. But Rex had seen everything, and Rex understood, in that instant, that the harmless old farmer he'd humiliated on the highway was anything but harmless. Rex slipped out the back exit moments later, adrenaline surging through his body. He didn't wait to see if Walter had noticed him. He ran 2 blocks to a gas station, ducked behind the pumps, and tried to steady his breathing. That's when Walter finally caught up to him. Rex! Rex spun around, stumbling backward against a fuel pump. Stay back, man. I don't want any trouble. You already have trouble, Walter said calmly, stepping closer. More than you understand. Give me the lighter, and I'll make sure you get through this alive. Rex's hand instinctively went to his pocket. Why does everybody want this stupid thing so bad? Before Walter could answer, headlights swept across the gas station lot. 2 black SUVs skidded to a stop near the entrance, doors flying open as armed men poured out, weapons raised. Get down, Walter shouted, shoving Rex behind a concrete pillar just as gunfire shattered the gas station windows. What happened next stunned Rex more than anything he'd witnessed in his entire life. Walter moved through the chaos with terrifying precision, disarming one attacker with his bare hands, using a fuel hose to trip another, ducking and countering with movements that looked less like an old farmer and more like a soldier who had done this 1,000 times before. Within moments, 3 of the 4 attackers were on the ground, and the last one retreated toward the SUVs, radioing frantically for backup as they sped away into the darkness. Rex stared at Walter, breathless, blood pounding in his ears. What? What are you? Walter turned toward him, his expression unreadable, eyes still scanning the darkness for further threats. Someone who used to fight men far worse than you, Walter said quietly. And someone who's the only reason you're still breathing right now. For the first time since stealing that lighter, Rex understood he wasn't dealing with an ordinary old man at all, and whatever secret hid inside that brass lighter was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. They drove through the night in silence. Rex slumped in the passenger seat of Walter's borrowed truck, one hand pressed against a shallow cut on his arm from flying glass. Every few minutes, he stole a glance at the old man beside him, trying to reconcile the humiliated farmer from the highway with the person who had just dismantled 4 armed men in under a minute. Walter said nothing until the truck began climbing a narrow dirt road into the mountains, far from any town, any highway, any place where a phone signal could betray their location. Where are we going? Rex finally asked. Somewhere safe. For now. The cabin appeared an hour later, tucked into a hillside and nearly invisible beneath years of overgrown brush. It looked abandoned, broken shutters, a collapsed porch step, windows caked in dust. But when Walter pried open a hidden panel behind the fireplace, Rex saw generators, medical supplies, and communication equipment that had no business existing in a forgotten mountain shack. This place, what is it? Rex asked, wincing as Walter cleaned the cut on his arm with practiced hands. Walter was quiet for a long moment, staring into the darkness beyond the cabin's dusty window. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight Rex hadn't heard from him before. 22 years ago, I wasn't a farmer, Walter said. I worked for the government. The kind of work that doesn't exist on paper. The kind where the people you fight don't wear uniforms. And if you're caught, no one comes to save you. Rex sat frozen, listening. My last mission, Walter continued, was against a criminal network moving weapons, money, and people across 3 continents. Men who bought judges, bribed generals, and made entire governments disappear when they got in the way. I spent 4 years building a case against them, financial records, real identities, proof that could bring the whole organization down. And the lighter? Rex asked quietly. Walter reached into his jacket, and pulled out the very same brass lighter Rex had stolen from him on the highway. He turned it over once in his fingers before pressing a small hidden latch near its base. The bottom panel clicked open, revealing a thin strip of film no larger than a fingernail. "Microfilm," Walter said. "Everything I collected. Every name, every account number, every shipment. Enough evidence to end an organization that thought itself untouchable." Rex stared at the tiny strip of film in disbelief. "That's it? That little thing? That little thing is worth more than every dollar your entire club has ever seen," Walter said. "During my extraction, my cover was blown. My handler was killed. My house was burned to hide the evidence. Evidence I never had the chance to deliver. Everyone assumed I died in that fire. I let them believe it. It was the only way to protect the people I loved. So you just disappeared? Became a farmer? I became nobody," Walter said. "No name, no history, no danger following me home. I built a quiet life because a quiet life was the only kind that let me sleep at night without worrying someone would come for the people I cared about." Rex sat in silence, absorbing everything. Slowly, the arrogance that had defined him for years began crumbling into something closer to shame. "We didn't know," Rex finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We just wanted to mess with you. Make a funny video. We had no idea any of this was real." Walter studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I know. Then why are you helping me?" "Because you're 24 years old and terrified, and none of this is your fault," Walter said. "Because whatever mistakes you've made, you don't deserve to die for something you didn't understand. And because the men hunting you won't stop until either they get this lighter back, or every person connected to it is silenced permanently." Rex swallowed hard. "So what happens now?" Walter closed the lighter carefully, sliding it back into his jacket pocket. "Now I finish what I started 20 years ago. I get this evidence to people who can still use it. And I make sure you, your friends, and everyone else caught in this mess survives long enough to see it happen. Just like that, you're going back into whatever this is. After 20 years." Walter's eyes hardened, something old and dangerous flickering behind them. "I never wanted to go back. I built a peaceful life because I earned it. But your little video woke up men who should have stayed asleep forever. They know I'm alive now. They won't stop hunting until this is finished, one way or another." Outside, the wind howled softly against the cabin's broken shutters. Rex looked at Walter differently now, not as a helpless old farmer they'd humiliated for entertainment, but as a man who had spent his entire life protecting people who would never know his name, sacrificing everything, disappearing into silence so that others could live safely. "I'm sorry," Rex said quietly, "for everything we did to you." Walter nodded once, his expression softening just slightly. "Apology accepted. Now get some rest. Tomorrow, we start moving again, and it's not going to be safe for either of us." Rex lay back against the cabin's worn couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything Walter had just told him. Somewhere out there, dangerous men were hunting a piece of microfilm the size of a fingernail, and an old farmer's forgotten past was about to collide violently with the present. While Walter and Rex hid in the mountains, Anton Voss was already 3 steps ahead. He sat in the back of a black SUV parked on a ridge overlooking Cedar County, a tablet glowing in his lap, satellite images of Walter's farmhouse displayed across the screen. His men had spent the last 24 hours quietly working through every gas station, diner, and truck stop between the clubhouse and the mountains, piecing together the same trail Walter had used to track Rex. Except Anton's men weren't nearly as gentle with the people they questioned. "The old man isn't at the farm," one of his lieutenants reported. "Neighbors say his truck's been gone since yesterday." Anton smiled thinly, closing the tablet. "Then we bring him to us." He had learned long ago that the fastest way to draw out a ghost wasn't to chase him through forests and mountain roads. It was to burn down everything he still had left to lose. The attack came just after dawn. 3 trucks rolled slowly up the gravel driveway of Walter's farm, engines idling low, headlights off despite the early morning darkness. Men in dark clothing spread out across the property with practiced efficiency, moving toward the barn, the equipment shed, the old farmhouse itself. They searched quickly and violently, tearing through drawers, flipping furniture, ripping open the walls Walter had spent decades calling home. They found nothing. The lighter wasn't there. It never would be. Frustrated and out of patience, Anton's men made their message unmistakable. They doused the barn in fuel, torched the equipment shed, and set fire to 60 years of Walter's life in less than 20 minutes. Flames climbed high into the pale morning sky, thick black smoke curling over the fields where Walter had planted his first crops decades ago, back when he was still pretending to be someone he'd never truly become. By the time neighboring farmers noticed the smoke and called for help, the trucks were already gone, vanishing down the county highway just as quickly as they had appeared. Walter and Rex were 3 hours away, driving down from the mountains, when Walter's old radio crackled to life with a warning from one of the few contacts he still trusted, a retired operative living quietly 2 counties over, someone who still monitored certain frequencies out of habit. "Walter, it's Danny. Your place. They hit it hard. Barn's gone, equipment shed's gone. Fire department's out there now, but there's nothing left to save." Walter's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. For a long moment, he said nothing at all, staring straight ahead at the empty highway. "Walter," Rex asked cautiously, "what happened?" "They found the farm," Walter said quietly. "They burned it." Rex's stomach dropped. "I'm sorry. This is because of me. Because of that stupid video." Walter didn't answer immediately. He pressed harder on the gas pedal, the old truck's engine straining as they raced toward Cedar County. They arrived just after noon. Smoke still hung heavy over the property, thick and gray against the pale afternoon sky. The barn where Walter had stored his father's old tools was nothing but blackened beams and smoldering ash. The equipment shed had completely collapsed. Even the farmhouse itself bore deep scars, broken windows, scorched siding, doors torn from their hinges. Walter climbed out of the truck slowly, walking through the wreckage of his life with the same unnerving calm he'd shown on the highway 3 days earlier. But Rex, watching closely now, saw something different in his eyes this time. Not calm, restrained fury, carefully controlled, the kind that had once made this quiet farmer one of the most dangerous men in his profession. A neighboring farmer, Hank Miller, ran up to Walter, his face pale with worry. "Walter, thank God you're okay. We tried calling, but couldn't reach you. What in God's name happened here? Is everyone safe?" Walter asked immediately. "Your family, the Whitmores, the Coles down the road. Everyone's fine, Walter, but get them somewhere safe. Tonight. All of them," Walter said firmly. "This isn't finished." Hank stared at him, confused. "Walter, what's going on? This isn't like you." Walter didn't answer directly. Instead, he walked toward the ashes of his barn, crouching down beside the still-smoking remains of what had once been his father's workshop. He picked up a piece of scorched wood, turning it over in his hands, his jaw tightening with quiet, controlled anger. Rex approached carefully, standing a respectful distance away. "Walter, I'm so sorry." Walter stood slowly, dropping the burnt wood back into the ash. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but something had changed within it. Something final, something decided. "I spent 20 years running from my past, hiding from men I once fought against, trying to build a quiet life far away from all of it," Walter said. "I told myself that peace was worth the silence, worth pretending to be someone else forever." He turned to face Rex directly, his eyes hard as steel. "They just made a mistake burning this farm down. Because now there's nothing left here to protect anymore, which means there's nothing left holding me back." Rex swallowed hard. "What are you going to do?" Walter looked one final time at the smoldering remains of everything he had built, then turned toward his truck. "I'm going to finish what I started 20 years ago," he said quietly. "And this time, I'm not running away when it's over." 2 days later, Walter stood in a rented storage unit 20 miles outside Cedar County, surrounded by equipment he hadn't touched in 20 years. Rex watched from a folding chair, still bandaged, still stunned by how quickly the quiet farmer had transformed into someone else entirely. Someone methodical, sharp-eyed, and utterly focused. Danny, the retired operative who'd warned them about the farm, had come through with something crucial: a location. Anton Voss's organization was preparing to move the microfilm's rightful buyers into position at a warehouse complex near the river port, where foreign contacts were arriving within 48 hours to negotiate for information the syndicate didn't even possess yet. They believed Walter would come to them eventually. They just didn't know how soon or how prepared he would be. "You're seriously going in there?" Rex asked, watching Walter lay out surveillance photographs across a workbench. "Just the two of us." "Not just us," Walter said. The door to the storage unit creaked open, and two familiar faces stepped inside. Marcus and Denny, two bikers from the Iron Vultures who had survived the clubhouse raid. Both men looked different now, humbled, quieter than the arrogant riders who had once laughed while filming Walter's humiliation. "Rex called us," Marcus said, glancing nervously at Walter. "Said you needed help. Said this whole thing was our fault to begin with." Walter studied them for a long moment. "This isn't a joyride. People will try to kill you in there." "We know," Denny said quietly. "We've already seen what these people are capable of. We want to help make it right." Walter nodded slowly, something close to respect flickering behind his tired eyes. "Then listen carefully. We're not storming in with guns blazing. We're going in smart, surveillance, disguises, patience. One mistake, and none of us walk out of there." The warehouse complex sat along the river, a maze of shipping containers, loading docks, and rusted cargo cranes stretching into the darkness. Security cameras covered every entrance, and armed guards patrolled the perimeter in coordinated shifts. To an untrained eye, it looked impenetrable. Walter had broken into far worse. Dressed in stolen maintenance uniforms, Walter and Rex slipped through a service entrance while Marcus and Denny created a calculated distraction near the front gate, a stalled delivery truck blocking the main road, drawing several guards away from their posts at exactly the right moment. Inside, Walter moved with terrifying precision, disabling security cameras with small devices from his hidden equipment, memorizing guard rotations, guiding Rex silently through blind spots most people would never notice. Rex, despite his fear, found himself amazed at how invisible they became, not through force, but through patience and careful observation. "How do you even see all this?" Rex whispered as they crouched behind a stack of shipping containers. 20 years of training doesn't disappear," Walter murmured. "It just goes quiet." They reached the central warehouse office just before midnight, finding exactly what Danny's intelligence had promised. Computer servers containing shipment records, hidden accounts, and communication logs tying Anton Voss directly to criminal operations spanning multiple countries. Walter worked quickly, extracting data onto a small drive while Rex kept watch by the door. Everything was going according to plan, until Rex's radio crackled with panic. "Guys, we've got a problem," Marcus's voice hissed through the earpiece. They caught Denny trying to slip back through the fence. "They're bringing him inside right now." Walter froze for half a second before continuing his work, his expression hardening. "Stay calm. Keep the truck ready." Rex's hands trembled. "We have to help him." "We will," Walter said, "but not by rushing him blind." Before Walter could finish downloading the final files, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway outside the office. The door burst open, and 3 armed guards stormed inside, weapons raised, shouting commands. Walter reacted instantly, disarming the first guard with brutal efficiency, but Rex, panicking, knocked over a metal shelf, drawing the attention of guards stationed nearby. Within moments, the warehouse alarm blared to life, red emergency lights flashing through every hallway. "Go now," Walter shouted, shoving Rex toward the exit. They sprinted through the maze of containers as guards flooded the complex, shouting orders, weapons drawn. Walter and Rex barely made it back to the service entrance, diving through just as gunfire erupted behind them, bullets sparking off metal containers inches from where they'd been standing seconds earlier. They reached Marcus's truck, engine already running, and sped away into the darkness as alarms continued wailing behind them. But their celebration was short-lived. "Where's Denny?" Rex asked breathlessly, scanning the truck bed. "Marcus, where is he?" Marcus's face was pale, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. "They still have him. They caught him before we could get out." Walter's jaw tightened, staring back at the warehouse complex fading into the distance behind them, red lights still flashing against the night sky. His radio crackled to life moments later, a cold, familiar voice cutting through the static. Anton Voss himself. "I believe you have something that belongs to me, old friend," Anton said calmly. "And I have something that belongs to you. Let's discuss a trade, the lighter, for your young friend's life. Come alone, or he dies." Walter closed his eyes briefly, gripping the radio tightly in his weathered hand. "Tell me where," he said quietly. "I'll be there." The cargo terminal stretched along the riverbank like a graveyard of steel, towering stacks of shipping containers, silent cranes hanging motionless against the night sky, the water beyond glowing faintly under a half-moon. Anton had chosen the location carefully. Open ground, few hiding spots, easy to watch from every angle. Walter arrived alone, exactly as instructed, the brass lighter tucked into his jacket pocket. He walked slowly across the loading dock, his footsteps echoing against concrete, his eyes scanning every shadow, every rooftop, every possible position a sniper might use. Anton stood, waiting near a stack of containers, flanked by 6 armed men. Denny knelt on the ground beside him, hands bound, a bruise darkening across his cheek, but otherwise alive. "You look older than I remember," Anton said, studying Walter with something between admiration and hatred. 20 years of pretending to be a farmer. I have to admit, it's impressive work." "Let the boy go," Walter said calmly. "You wanted me. Here I am." Anton smiled thinly. "The lighter first." Walter reached slowly into his jacket, pulling out the brass lighter, holding it up for Anton to see. "The microfilm's already gone, Anton. Copied hours ago, transmitted to people who will know exactly what to do with it. Burning down my farm, hunting this boy, none of it mattered. You're already finished." Anton's expression flickered, the first real crack in his composure. "You're bluffing. Check your accounts in the morning," Walter said. "See how many of them are still active." What Walter didn't mention was that this wasn't entirely true. Not yet. The files were extracted, sitting on a small drive back in Marcus's truck, waiting to be transmitted the moment Walter confirmed Denny's safety. But a lifetime of covert work had taught him one unshakable truth. Sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't a gun. It was absolute, unwavering confidence in a lie. Anton's men shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. Doubt was spreading exactly as Walter intended. "Kill him," Anton snapped suddenly, done negotiating. Chaos erupted instantly. Walter moved the moment the words left Anton's mouth, throwing the lighter hard into the darkness as a distraction while diving behind a nearby container. Gunfire tore through the night air, sparks flying off steel walls. Walter rolled, came up firing a weapon he'd hidden along his forearm, dropping 2 guards before they could properly aim. Rex, Marcus, and 2 of Danny's old contacts emerged from hidden positions along the dock exactly on cue. The second half of Walter's plan set into motion the moment his radio signal confirmed the trade had gone wrong. Smoke grenades hissed to life, thick gray clouds swallowing the loading dock, disorienting Anton's remaining men. In the confusion, Walter sprinted toward Denny, cutting his restraints with a single swift motion. "Move now." Denny scrambled to his feet, and together they ducked behind a row of containers just as bullets tore through the smoke around them. Anton, furious and desperate, grabbed the fallen lighter from the ground where Walter had thrown it, sprinting toward a small speedboat docked at the water's edge. "If I go down, everything burns with me," he shouted, vanishing into the smoke. Walter's eyes narrowed. He knew exactly where Anton was headed. The same escape route the organization had used decades earlier during Walter's very first mission against them, a route Walter had memorized long before Anton had even joined the organization. Get everyone to safety. Walter told Rex firmly. This ends now. He sprinted through the chaos, cutting across a service walkway that led directly toward the water, arriving at the dock just as Anton's boat engine roared to life. Without hesitation, Walter leaped from the pier, landing hard on the boat's deck, tackling Anton before he could steer them into open water. They struggled fiercely, the boat rocking violently beneath them. Anton fought with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose, but Walter fought with something far more powerful, 20 years of restrained anger, finally released. "You burned my home," Walter growled, pinning Anton against the boat's railing. "You threatened innocent people who had nothing to do with any of this. You destroyed everything I built." Anton shouted back, struggling against Walter's grip. "No," Walter said coldly. "You destroyed it yourself, the moment you decided innocent lives meant nothing to you." With one final, controlled motion, Walter disarmed Anton completely, forcing him down onto the boat's deck as flashing lights suddenly illuminated the riverbank behind them. Federal agents, dozens of them, moving swiftly across the cargo terminal, guided by the very data Walter had transmitted the moment he confirmed Denny's rescue. Anton stared up at Walter, breathless, defeated. How? How did you know they'd get here in time?" Walter looked toward the shore, where agents were already rounding up the last of Anton's men, red and blue lights reflecting off the dark water. "Because unlike you," Walter said quietly, "I never stopped trusting the people I once fought beside." Federal agents secured Anton Voss within minutes, placing him in restraints as the remaining members of his organization surrendered or fled into the night, only to be captured hours later as coordinated raids swept through 3 states simultaneously. The direct result of the evidence Walter had spent 20 years protecting finally delivered into the right hands. As dawn broke over the river, Walter stood quietly at the edge of the dock, watching federal vehicles carry away the last remnants of an organization that had haunted him for 2 decades. For the first time in 20 years, the ghost that had lived quietly on a small farm in Cedar County finally, truly, allowed himself to breathe free. 2 weeks passed before the news cameras finally stopped parking outside Cedar County. Federal agents had made their arrests. The syndicate's international network had collapsed under the weight of Walter's 20-year-old evidence, and reporters from every major outlet wanted an interview with the mysterious farmer who had single-handedly brought down a criminal empire. Walter refused every single request. He also refused something far more tempting: a private visit from 2 government officials who arrived at Cedar County in unmarked suits, offering him reinstatement, honors, even a formal position back within the agency he'd once served. They stood in what remained of his burned-out yard, promising him recognition, resources, a chance to matter again on a global stage. Walter listened patiently, then shook his head. "I already gave 20 years to that life," he said quietly. "I'm not interested in giving 20 more. I just want to grow my tomatoes in peace." The officials exchanged a glance, clearly unaccustomed to hearing no from someone with Walter's skill set. But something in his tired, steady eyes told them arguing would be pointless. They shook his hand, thanked him for his service, and left Cedar County without him. Rebuilding the farm became a community effort nobody expected. Insurance covered part of the damage, but it was Walter's neighbors, Hank Miller, the Whitmores, the Coles, people he'd quietly helped for years without ever asking for anything in return, who truly rebuilt what the fire had taken. They arrived each morning with lumber, tools, and casseroles, working alongside Walter to raise a new barn from the ashes of the old one. But the most surprising helpers were the ones nobody expected to show up at all. The surviving members of the Iron Vultures Motorcycle Club arrived one morning in a line of motorcycles, engines rumbling quietly down the gravel driveway. Rex led them, climbing off his bike slowly, uncertain of his welcome. Behind him, Marcus, Denny, and a dozen other bikers who had once laughed while filming Walter's humiliation stood waiting, heads lowered, humbled by everything they now understood. "We came to help," Rex said simply. "For as long as it takes." Walter studied them for a long moment, Memories of that highway humiliation still fresh enough to sting. Then he nodded slowly, gesturing toward the half-finished barn behind him. "Grab a hammer," he said. "There's plenty of work to do." Over the following weeks, the same men who had once thrown Walter into a muddy ditch for entertainment spent their days rebuilding his barn, repairing fences, replanting fields damaged during the fire. It wasn't easy work, and it wasn't quick forgiveness. Walter made that clear more than once. But slowly, painfully, something resembling redemption began taking root in Cedar County, growing alongside the crops Walter replanted with his own weathered hands. On the final evening of the rebuilding, as the sun sank low over freshly painted barn walls, Rex approached Walter carrying something small wrapped in cloth. "I had it restored," Rex said, unwrapping the object carefully. "Figured it belonged back where it came from." It was the brass lighter, cleaned, polished, its dents smoothed as much as possible, its brass surface gleaming softly in the evening light. Walter took it slowly, turning it over in his fingers, memories of everything it had caused flooding quietly through his mind. "For weeks, I thought this thing was cursed," Rex admitted. "Thought it was the reason everything went wrong." Walter shook his head slowly. "It wasn't the lighter that caused any of this, Rex. It was choices. Yours, mine, Anton's. The lighter was just a spark. What happened afterward, that was on all of us." Rex nodded. Looking out over the newly rebuilt farm, the community gathered nearby, sharing food and quiet laughter for the first time in weeks. "I used to think toughness meant humiliating people weaker than you, making them feel small so you could feel big." He paused, glancing at Walter. "I don't think that anymore." Walter allowed himself a small, tired smile. "Good. That's worth more than anything you could have learned from me." That night, after everyone had finally gone home, Walter sat alone on his porch, watching fireflies drift lazily across freshly turned fields. The brass lighter rested in his palm, catching the last golden light of sunset. He thought about Margaret, gone 8 years now, who had never known the full truth about the man she'd married. He thought about his daughter, living her own quiet life 2 states away, still unaware of what her father had once been. And perhaps, Walter decided, she never needed to know. Some sacrifices were meant to stay silent forever. He thought about the 20 years he'd spent hiding, and the 20 years still ahead of him, finally free from the shadows of his past. Walter closed his hand gently around the lighter, slipping it back into his jacket pocket, not as a weapon anymore, not as a secret, but simply as a reminder of everything he had survived and everything he had chosen to protect. Somewhere down the road, headlights flickered briefly in the darkness before disappearing toward town. Just an ordinary truck on an ordinary night in an ordinary little farming town. Nobody driving past would ever guess that the quiet old farmer sitting alone on his porch had just saved more lives than most people would ever know existed, and that the next time someone underestimated him, they'd be making the very same mistake that had once again, briefly, awoken a ghost the world believed was long since buried.